So, you want to be a depressed child in the world of Don't Starve. Well, here's everything you may need to know to get started. From Don't Starve to Don't Starve Together, strengths and weaknesses, here's everything you need to know about Wendy. We're going to be starting with the OG version of Don't Starve as we usually do. Wendy in Don't Starve has a respectable stat line of 150 health, 150 hunger, and 200 sanity. Although she does have a 0.75 attack multiplier, meaning she does around 25% less damage. She is a locked character, being made available when you obtain 640 XP, or basically, survive 32 days and then escape via any means, be it teleportado or the other way. Wendy also starts with a unique item called Abigail's Flower. When you first spawn in as Wendy, you're in a pretty bad state. That is because Abigail's Flower actually doesn't work right away. Yeah, you heard me right. Wendy mains over here on the OG version of Don't Starve have to fend for themselves for around a day before even getting the chance to summon Abigail. And once you do have the ability to, it's not a simple right click. Abigail requires a sacrifice. This can be anything, and usually the best thing is butterflies. Caution should be taken, however, as summoning Abigail will incur a 50 sanity penalty. But once Abigail is out of the flower, she's a very powerful tool. Before we fully talk about Abigail though, let's go over Wendy's other personal upside. That being that she has a 25% slower sanity drain from auras, so like bosses and monsters and stuff, and darkness. This means that dusk, bosses, and pitch darkness have less sanity effects than other characters. Alright, now that we've talked about Wendy's one personal upside, let's go on to the real reason that anybody plays Wendy: Abigail. Abigail is a follower type mob who has quite a large health pool, that being 600 health. But remember, this is armorless health, so it's not exactly that big. She also heals at around 1 health per second, and the damage she is capable of doing depends entirely on the day segment it happens to be, with day being 10 damage per hit, dusk being 20 damage per hit, and night being 40 damage per hit. Abigail is amazing for clearing out large hordes of stun-lockable enemies, like crocodogs, spiders, and bees. But be cautious when it comes to enemies that can't be stun-locked. 600 health is a lot, yes, but she has no armor. A hound, for example, does 20 damage. If 5 hounds hit Abigail at once, which isn't uncommon in later hound waves because they can't be stun-locked, that's 1/6 of her health gone in an instant. The biggest problem with Abigail in this version of Don't Starve is, like I said before, she has no commands. If you attack something, Abigail will hard focus that creature, even if you retreat. This can lead to her getting absolutely stomped in a majority of cases. Now, this can be good or bad depending on how you look at it. If your goal is escaping, well, Abigail will make for a great distraction. But losing her can be incredibly annoying because her cooldown gets longer after she falls in battle, becoming, instead of 1 day, 1.5 days, which isn't great. Of course, having a perpetual teammate in a single player game does have to come with some downsides, right? Well, she has 2 big downsides that I would like to talk about, and one of them is actually dependent on what control style you use for the game. So first, let's go ahead and get the obvious one out of the way. Yes, as a direct nerf to the fact that Wendy gets a companion that does a decent amount of damage, Wendy does less damage. Now, this doesn't necessarily make life harder. It just means you'll have to prepare for longer fights and more wasted durability on your weapons. A very powerful weapon for Wendy is the Hambat. Well, who am I kidding? This is a powerful weapon for every character pretty much, but especially for Wendy, because now you won't have to worry as much about the whole wasting durability thing. Of course, if you're like rich and don't care anything, then hey, you can make whatever weapon you want. You do you, man. As for Wendy's less obvious major downside, well, this one is for those of you who do not play on a mouse and keyboard. Now, I remember this haunting me back during my early Xbox days, and that's because on controllers, the attack button is just that, a blanket attack button. There is no Control F, and even F works better on keyboard and mouse. This means that you can very easily accidentally hit Abigail. The problem with this is that when you hit Abigail, it automatically unsummons her. Yeah, that's really fun, right? Now you can counter this by simply paying attention to where your attack is, but still, it's a needless headache and a huge nerf to non-keyboard users. Alright, those 2 downsides may seem horrible, right? Well, unless you're playing on a keyboard, that's just one downside. But that's enough doom posting about Wendy. We got all her downsides out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about some tips and tricks. Most of these are going to focus on Abigail since she's basically the reason to play Wendy. First, Abigail is great as a hunting buddy. Now, you're not going to be able to just set Abigail onto a rabbit and forget about it like in Don't Starve Together, because rabbits are actually for some reason smarter in Don't Starve single player, but you can kind of set her on certain things and she'll go do it. Jellyfish and Shipwrecked, she can go take those out for you. Crabbits, I believe she is faster than as well. Rabbits, you do have to be a little more active, but otherwise, if you're starving, you can find ways to use Abigail to hunt. It is difficult, much more difficult than Don't Starve Together, but it's there, I guess. I have to include it as a tip and trick because you can do it if you're, struggling. I was talking about Jellyfish from Shipwrecked. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about Shipwrecked and Hamlet. Abigail is immune to envenomation. This can make her invaluable during monsoon season when all them yucky little skeeters get loose from all the ponds that form, or those abominable monstrosities from Hamlet, or just a huge snake horde that would never happen in game and I just spawned this in for dramatic effect. You guys love that. Either way, you get the point. She can't be envenomated, so use her as a meat shield. Or a ghost shield. I guess there's no meat there. And finally, I want to keep this short since, Abigail is pretty self-explanatory besides these key things. Entities killed by Abigail will not raise your naughtiness. Which means, if you really want to get your hands on the old Belle, but don't want to fight Krampus, just have Abigail do your sick crimes for you. Apparently the laws of naughtiness don't apply to ghosts. And there you go. That's about everything I have to say about Wendy in Don't Starve. Not too much to talk about, but of course, we all know that changes dramatically in Don't Starve Together. So let's move over here to talk about Wendy, Don't Starve Together edition. Coming in with the exact same stat line as her single player counterpart, 150 health, 150 hunger, and 200 sanity, along with the same damage reduction and her signature flower, you might not think that much has changed. But ooh, I bet you couldn't guess this. She has a favorite food now, Banana Pop, which will give her more hunger compared to other characters. Honestly, not a bad favorite food, all things considered. Alright, now on to her actual big changes. There's a lot, so get ready. We're gonna talk about Wendy's base kit first, then move to her upsides, then her downsides, glance over her skill tree, and then finally I'll give you guys a few tips and tricks to become the best grieving sister you possibly can be. So first, Abigail is changed significantly, for much, much better. Now, Abigail can be summoned and unsummoned at the click of a button, with absolutely no cooldown whatsoever. However, her stat line has changed a little bit thanks to her new leveling system. The longer Abigail is kept active and alive, she will level up, providing more health to Abigail up to the OG health of 600, as well as providing actual light. But her damage will still only be affected by the day-night cycle regardless of level. Level is reset upon Wendy or Abigail's death. If you can call it that, since she's, already... Whatever, let's move on. Now, a massive amount of Wendy's base kit still relies on good old Abigail to function, and that alone has received a huge array of reworks. Summoning can not only be done at will, like I said, but the sanity penalty has been turned into a sanity gain. Now, summoning Abigail will actually give Wendy 15 sanity, but the cost to this is that dismissing Abigail will remove that 15 sanity, and watching Abigail get defeated will result in a 30 sanity loss. This mechanic alone actually can be used to your benefit, and I'll go into specifics when we get to the tips and tricks segment. Wendy now has a lot more control over Abigail as well, obtaining two specific modes for Abigail, Soothed and Riled Abigail. Soothed Abigail will act almost identical to pre-rework Abigail, not searching out combat, and only engaging if either her or Wendy are attacked. She will also easily disengage combat when in soothed form, and Riled is the new state for Abigail. All this does is basically make it so that Abigail will attack every single creature nearby, and will refuse to disengage unless Wendy actively leaves the area. It's not great, and it might not seem like a lot, but this tiny, minuscule amount of control makes Abigail 1,000 trillion% better. Wendy can also now augment Abigail with some extra stuff via fancy elixirs. Now look, I could just go over all of these in depth, but if you guys really want an in-depth look at all of these things, that's what the wiki page is for. Instead, I'm going to keep it real with you and just skim over all of what they do and which ones are the most valuable. But before we do that, let's talk about their main crafting component, Morning Glory. Morning Glory is a Wendy exclusive item, and it comes from helping those strange little ghosts that you can find loitering around graves sometimes. Basically, you just do a short little mini game and try to find the lost toys by using the Pip Spook as a divining rod of sorts. And for each toy you get rewarded with Morning Glory, with a big bonus at the end. It's really quite simple. so I'm not going to spend too long talking about it. You're probably more interested in the elixirs anyway. But the minigame is as simple as this. You follow the Pipspook to the area, and then you use the Pipspook as a divining rod. I can't stress it any easier than that. It's a very easy minigame, trust me. Revenant Restorative is a long but weak heal for Abigail, as it will give her a 2 health per second buff for an entire day. This one is practically useless, as Abigail already heals 1 health per second, which is much more than enough for whatever this would matter for. Its upgraded version, however, Spectral Cure-All, will give Abigail a whopping 20 health a second for 30 seconds. Now this one is actually very good, especially for large-scale fights or emergency healing. Unyielding Drought doubles the duration of Abigail's new invulnerability mechanic that stops her from getting insta-killed. Oh wait, I didn't mention that? Yeah, right. Abigail now has this weird bubble thing that she does whenever she is hit, which will provide her immunity to damage. All this does is ensure that she can't be insta-killed by non-stunnable creatures, like frogs for example. And this elixir will double that invincibility, from half a second to a full second. It also lasts for an entire in-game day. Overall, this elixir can be very useful if, again, you plan on fighting a lot of non-stun lockable mobs like frogs or even hounds. But against bosses or high damage, low attack speed mobs, it's not entirely that useful and you're better off skipping it. Distilled Vengeance is an upgraded version of Unyielding Drought, providing the same benefit for the same amount of time. However, now the shield will also do 20 damage to all mobs that hit it. Again, it's not very useful against high damage targets, but I mean, look at how fast it shreds frogs. If you want to farm frog legs or something, it's actually pretty good. But otherwise, it's not crazy good. Nightshade Nostrum will make Abigail deal her full 40 damage for an entire day. Now, during long night portions of the year, like late autumn, winter, and early spring, this effect is negligible. But during the opposite side of the year, it can really beef Abigail up for more of the day. This elixir is completely useless in the caves, however, as Abigail will always do her full 40 damage down there, regardless of the overworld conditions. And finally, we saved the worst for last, Vigor Mortis. It's a very simple elixir, and in this case, simple does not mean good. It just increases Abigail's movement speed by 75% for an in-game day. Now, I already talked about this in Willow's Bernie segment, but follower movement speed means absolutely nothing. Yes, Abigail is kind of slow, but because she's a follower, she'll simply teleport to you if you get too far away. And when it comes to getting rabbits or something, it's still not that useful because Abigail without a speed boost can get rabbits in Don't Starve Together because they're dumber in Don't Starve Together. Also, why are you hunting rabbits in Don't Starve Together? There's so many other better food sources. Either way, yeah, don't make this one. It's not great. Actually, okay, hold on. Vigor Mortis is good for one thing. If you play on a PvP server, it actually is very good for getting Abigail to catch up to other players, so there is that, but other than PvP, it's not great at all. Now, before you get any funny ideas like, oh, what if I gave my Abigail healing and damage? That would be super OP, right? Stop thinking. You're being silly. No, Papa Clay already thought about that, and they said no fun was allowed. So they made it so Abigail can only have one effect at a time. So when it comes to which ones you should pick, well, I would just avoid Vigor Mortis and Revenant Restorative. All of the others can have their own uses, and obviously, Distilled Vengeance is just better than Unyielding Drought. But unless you have a Wormwood friend, you probably aren't swimming in living logs, which is required for the Distilled Vengeance, so I would just go for Cure-Alls, really. I couldn't find a use for really any of the other ones. They're not that useful. Still on the topic of Abigail, this was more of an Abigail rework than a Wendy rework, Wendy has access to a special structure called the Cistern, a funny play on the words sister and urn, which is morbid and kinda sad, but oh well. On its own, the Cistern does nothing but remind you of how futile life is. Place 4 petals on it though, and suddenly it might just become your favorite structure, providing a whopping 25 sanity per minute to anyone standing close by, and leveling up Abigail 4 times faster. For something that only costs 4 petal every 6 days, it's not that bad at all. And the recipe is cheap and affordable early game, being 3 cut stones, 3 boards, and 1 ash. Note that if you are playing with another friend who happens to be playing Wendy, you only need 1 decorated cistern to get the whole Abigail levels faster effect. It's global and for every Abigail on the server, which is pretty nice. And finally, before we start talking about that skill tree, There's one more thing that Wendy has, as if you needed any more reasons to believe that Wendy was significantly stronger in Don't Starve Together than her previous iteration. She also has a way to not only remove her damage penalty, but also just outright give herself a damage buff. Whenever Abigail attacks a creature, she will cause petals to float around them. This is known as a Vex, and any enemy who happens to be vexed will take 10% extra damage from any character who isn't Wendy. Wendy players, however, will do a whopping 40% extra damage, meaning Wendy, as long as she attacks with Abigail, will do a total of I think like 10% or so extra damage. And before you ask, yes, you can get this buff on a Beefalo, which also ignores Wendy's weakness downside, making a Beefalo a must-have on Wendy if you truly want to maximize your damage stocks, because then you're hitting like 50% extra damage. With an ornery Beefalo, that's a lot. So yeah, the next time you see a Wendy riding a Beefalo, they're maximizing their potential there. And you should probably be doing that too. Alright, enough about the reworks. Let's talk about that juicy skill tree. First off, it's the only skill tree as of right now to be completely unique and have this cool Ouija board effect that will actually move on its own if you leave it for long enough. But that's just looks. What about the substance? Well, unfortunately, Wendy does have a few filler skills. Not useless per se, but definitely boring. The first tree we'll be covering, however, her Morning Glory branch, is anything but boring. It's actually pretty sweet. Morning Glory 1 allows you to spend Morning Glory to revive either butterflies or Luna moths. Now this alone is a very niche skill, but if you happen to be swimming in Morning Glory, it basically removes the need for a bug net for these two critters. But again, you have to be swimming in Morning Glory for this skill to be worth it. And obviously, this skill isn't the big ticket item in this tree. No, my friends, that goes to Morning Glory too. Say what you want about Wendy's skill tree, but this skill right here is probably one of the most unique and fun skills in the entire game period. This skill allows you to make a Morning Glory wreath, and that wreath allows you and your friends to drink elixirs. Yes, that's right. Now you can get buffs from the drinks. Now it does cost your head slot and the wreath does spoil, but the buffs you can get are very nice. Each elixir does something different, and I'll probably just flash a screenshot of the wiki here because I don't want to talk about all of them. I will, however, focus on a few that are notable to me specifically. The Spectral Cure-All is like turbocharged jelly beans and are amazing for combat healing if you plan on tanking a boss. And the Nightshade Nostrum becomes the cheapest pair of moggles you will ever wear, costing only 3 glories and 1 stinger. Everything else is very niche and or self-explanatory, but this skill alone opens some huge branches for Wendy not only as a powerful combat character, but also as a support character, since, you know, others can also use these wreaths. It's a really cool skill, man. This was probably the best skill when it first came out. I loved it. Maybe it's not her most useful skill, but I just love the creativity that went into it. Unfortunately, Clay kind of lost steam with the last portion of this branch, however, as Morning Glory 3 literally just gives you an alternative meat effigy craft. Yeah, that's it. Although you do get a cute animation if you use it as Wendy, so I can't crap on this skill too hard. They definitely cooked with this animation. Now let's move on to the branch that's going to help you get all of that Morning Glory that you're gonna need. The Pipspook branch. It's a very boring branch, all things considered, but it's pretty necessary for how vital Morning Glories are for Wendy. Pipspook Quest 1 will reduce the distance between lost toys when doing the Pipspook tracking minigame. Level 2 will allow you to collect 1 to 2 more lost toys, and finally, Level 3 is a very nice buff, causing Pipspooks to drop 2 Morning Glories per toy. What did I just say? Poor? Whatever. Instead of 1. And making the end bonus 6 instead of whatever it was. I forgot to note it down. I think it was like 4 or something. I'm sorry, guys. But it was definitely a lot less than 6. So there's that. Anyways, yeah, this skill tree is really boring, but it's an S tier because you need a lot of Morning Glory for a lot of the things that Wendy does. So I would still get it anyway. The next branch we will be looking at is the Elixir branch. This branch gives you ways to store elixirs, a new elixir, and buffs to your elixirs. All things elixirs. Let's get in. Starting with the first skill, Picnic Casket, which allows Wendy to make a basket that acts as a storage unit for all of your elixirs. This is absolutely phenomenal in general, and it's super easy to use elixirs on the go directly from the basket. It's an S tier skill for sure, for those of you who enjoy min-maxing your Abigail and not just spamming cure-alls like I do. Hell, even if you want to spam cure-alls, you can get a basket full of cure-alls. Ghastly Experience unlocks a brand new elixir. This one simply levels Abigail up to level 3 immediately. That's it. Nothing else. At least for Abigail. It's good to have around if you or your Abigail die a lot. And if you have a friend that dies a lot, you can pair this with the Wreath to act like a budget booster shot. Overall, it's not terrible, for the cost of one Forget-Me-Lot. Although I do wish that they let you use the new dried Forget-Me-Lots as a replacement because those are way easier to stockpile. And finally, the two skills that buff Wendy's strange concoctions. Strong Brew, which will cause any elixirs that have a timer of 1 day to now last 2 days, and Extra Yield, which allows Wendy to rarely craft double or even more rarely craft triple of an elixir. This can save you tons of Morning Glory in the long run, but it is gambling, so your mileage may vary. Next up, we have this strange perk which stands all alone, not part of any branch and not locked behind anything. This is the Vengeful Ghost skill, and it's a complete meme skill. What it does is essentially turns your friends, or even you, into a budget Abigail for about 15 seconds. This seems alright on paper until you realize how low the damage actually is. It's a fun perk all things considered, and definitely more unique than a lot of other perks in the entire game, but it's not that good, and you can skip this without feeling too bad. Also, it's a perk that only activates when you die, which you really shouldn't be doing, so yeah. Although, you know what, I kind of convinced myself, on a multiplayer server this could actually be pretty good, because, you know, you can't really control your other fellow friends. So yeah, I guess if you're on a multiplayer server, it's not too bad, but still, don't feel bad if you skip this one. The next branch appears to be Clay's attempt to turn Wendy into a semi-summoner character, like Weber. However, in practice, it's pretty rough. The Grave branch starts with Grave Beautification, which allows Wendy to decorate graves with petals, spawning her very own big spook after donating 3 petals, which will defend Wendy when she is nearby and is neutral to other players. The headstone will also very slowly convert these petals into evil flowers nearby, so it's a cheap way to get dark petals, which you need for the next skill. Also, it makes her immune to the evil flowers sanity drain, but does that really matter? Gravestones by Wendy allows Wendy to convert skeletons into graves by crafting graves and putting them on the skeletons. The graves costing dark petals and cut stones. And she can even relocate graves with a new craft, the Spirit Vessel. Now, I'm going to talk about this branch as a whole. If you enjoy decorating and want to make a nice little graveyard, go ahead and grab this branch. Or if you want to move graves a little closer for Morning Glory farming. However, in practice, that's all these skills are useful for. Big spooks are an absolute joke, and you are limited to only 4 of them. Sure, I guess if you spammed a ton of these graves and waited for a full moon, maybe you could get some value out of the ghosts, but otherwise this branch is a swap branch. After you're done moving the graves, there is no real reason to keep these 2. Now let's move on to the next branch. This one here is the Cistern branch, which, you guessed it, buffs the Cistern. Although I have to give credit where credit is due and say that this branch does have some unique aspects to it. Level 1 will cause petals to spoil 50% slower, making them last 12 days instead of 6. Level 2 will cause Wendy to have even less sanity drain from mobs. Deerclops, for example, with this skill will only drain 200 sanity per minute instead of 400, which does make a difference, believe it or not. She also will get 40 sanity per minute when near the Cistern, and share this effect with nearby players. Of course, these buffs require a decorated Cistern to be active. And level 3, well, that's the interesting one. Level 3 of Blessed Cistern allows you to Whoa, I just forgot what I was saying. Level 3 of Blessed Cistern allows you to customize the cistern by instead using either dark petals or loon tree blossoms. Dark petals reverse the sanity aura of the cistern, which is good if you were playing with Maxwell or Wanda mains who really need to farm nightmare fuel. But loon tree blossoms are the interesting one. By placing 4 of these, you will give Abigail the player tag. What this does is gives her what is essentially 50% reduced damage from bosses, because bosses do 50% more damage to NPC characters. However, this also nerfs her natural regen and any regen-based elixirs, so it's a double-edged sword. And I have found that Abigail still falls pretty quickly even with this on, and the healing nerf hits too hard for me to say that this branch is even worth it. The animation it gives you though when it is active is kinda nice. And on to our final pre-endgame branch, arguably the most important branch on this tree, we have the Abigail branch. This branch buffs Abigail in a multitude of ways. Level 1 unlocks a new command called Escape, which allows you to force Abigail to disengage and become invulnerable. This alone is a must-have S-tier perk, as it not only allows you to stop Abigail from being stupid, but it can also be used by high-skill players to help Abigail kite certain bosses. And as a bonus feature, whenever Abigail uses the escape command, it instantly de-aggroes the target. So, for example, as you can see with this Ancient Guardian, it's instantly de-aggroing him, so he has to re-aggro and do his little stupid animation, which is cool. Yeah, alright, moving on. Level 2 gives Abigail the attack command, which turns Abigail into a missile that dashes through all enemies, dealing damage. Simple, but very effective and nice. And finally, level 3 gives you access to 2 commands. Scare, which will cause all spookable creatures, basically most non-boss creatures that you will encounter, to freak out and start running around as if they were on fire. This is amazing for getting out of tight spots, and it can be spammed to basically turn every fight into an easy I win mode. Finally, the last command, which is the Haunt command, allows Abigail to haunt things much like a dead player can, which is nice for solo players trying to get a Spider Queen or something. Overall, this branch is amazing, and it's one of, if not the best branch on this entire tree. Get it as soon as possible and learn how to time these, and you'll quickly become a pro at playing Wendy. Now we're moving on to Wendy's affinity trees. You know, the ones you unlock by beating either the Celestial Champion for the Lunar Path or Ancient Fuel Weaver for the Shadow Path. The first two of both branches are pretty much the same, but opposite of each other. Like Lunar Sisterhood gives planar defense and 10% extra damage against shadows, and 10% protection from lunar creatures to both Wendy and Abigail, and Shadow Sisterhood does the exact same but the opposite. And level 2 of both of these skills give you new potions, the only difference between these two fancy potions being that the Lunar Potion buffs Abigail directly with 10 extra planar damage, and the Shadow Potion buffs players through her Vex, giving every player an extra 10%, or not 10%, 10 planar damage. My bad, guys. If you don't know what planar means, by the way, just think of it as armor-piercing damage. Oh yeah, and affinity potions can stack with a normal potion, so there's that too. I mean, they should, they're pretty expensive. The true difference comes in their respective level 3s. Lunar Abigail level 3 allows you to attune Abigail to a moon dial on a full moon, turning her into a Gestalt. This causes Abigail to buff her damage by a significant amount, with nighttime allowing her to do a whopping 250 damage per hit. However, her attack intervals become much slower, and the most important thing is that she loses her AoE. The Lunar Potion also has a really good synergy with this though, as it adds a whopping 100 extra planar damage to Gestalt Abigail. If you ever feel like you miss your old Abigail, you can revert her by using the moon dial during a new moon. The big problem though is that she loses her AoE attack, and she still goes down pretty quickly. So I've found its usefulness, even in boss fights where it's meant to be used, to be pretty lacking. On the flip side, Shadow Abigail is a direct buff to her Vexing mechanic. You just have to kill creatures in your inventory and then you'll buff Abigail for a short period of time, stacking on how many you kill at once. As ironic as it seems, I find this version of Abigail better for fighting bosses, at least actively, because combined with the Vexing Potion, you can get some really heavy DPS in. But to be completely honest, it's still very lacking. So the moral of the story here is that honestly, I can't genuinely say which side of her affinity tree is better. They both underperform, in my opinion. If Gestalt Abby still had swappable AoE, it would be good, but as it stands, I genuinely cannot tell you which one is better. But I will say that Gestalt Abby can have more versatility. Whew, and there you have it, Wendy's skill tree. It's honestly pretty good all things considered, but her rework from Don't Starve Original was the best part. But before we end it off, there's a few tips and tricks that I would like to leave behind for you all. First off, Wendy is not only amazing at fighting Fuel Weaver thanks to Abigail's AoE dealing with those stupid bugs that the Weaver eats, but also, if you for some reason don't want to deal with using a Nightmare Amulet, you can use the 15 sanity lost and 15 sanity gained from summoning and unsummoning Abby to get through the obelisks. And if you're particularly cracked at the game, you can use this for the Fuel Weaver's mind control attacks. Although I think it would be pretty hard thanks to the natural sanity drain. If your Abigail is level 2 or 3, she will produce light, which means you can use her to survive, but she can be pretty annoying, always floating away from you. Well, if you use the dance emote, she won't move at all, allowing you to AFK through the night like a true Don't Starver. And before I end Wendy's segment though, here's my preferred skill tree. Honestly, a lot of filler perks in this tree, but it's mine and I'm proud of it. It's what I used for my recent Wendy playthrough and it worked just fine. And yeah, there you have it. Everything you could possibly need to know about Wendy. This took a surprising amount of time because, well, I didn't really play Wendy before making this video. But regardless, it was really fun. I'm gonna go rest my hand though now because I just typed 30,000 characters and my hands don't feel very good. So I'm gonna see everybody. Polarlotus out. Bye-bye.